to the Quiet Warrior Show, where we help top leaders find their pathway to incredible success and a lifetime of happiness. Here is your host, Tom Dutta, the Quiet Warrior.
All right, everybody, welcome to the Quiet Warrior Show. It's me, Tom Dutta, your host, the Quiet Warrior. You can see I'm here in studio, and I've got somebody in the green room. And this interview I'm really stoked about. Let me tell you that we're live streaming, and well, that's the next generation of podcasting. So we're popping up on LinkedIn, YouTube, Facebook, and Twitter today. And if you give it a subscribe there, if you see my subscribe button, this will be released as a epic video premiere in the future, as well as a international podcast. We're now in 17 countries. And so give it a subscribe so that you get the notification of that release. I want to just tell you that this guest came across my studio, and I read the bio, and it intrigued me for many, many reasons, which you'll probably make sense of as we do some storytelling today. But I asked the guest a question. As you know, this is about the hero's journey, and I asked him, well, what's the backstory, man? What is the setbacks or the challenges along the journey? And I was blown away. He wrote me a nice letter, and the letter, it just got my heart. So we're going to hear about not only the greatness of the guest, but also about the journey, which is where most of the learnings are. Let me tell you a little bit about him before I bring him on. His name is Brad Schaeffer, author of a book called The Extraordinary. I'm going to flash a picture here, probably make him blush a little bit. I mean, talk about a GQ picture. I mean, this is the kind of picture you go like, okay, that guy, what does he do? Is he a movie star? Does he play in a rock band? Well, he does a few interesting things. He's an author of The Extraordinary, which just became #1, by the way. It tackles two sensitive subjects, autism and PTSD. And Brad likes to talk about those things. And The Extraordinary was about a teenage boy on the autism spectrum who narrated his struggles coping with a chaotic and scary world when his Marine Corps father returns from Iraq debilitated by an injury, PTSD. So Brad's going to talk about that, but what's interesting is the threads, and when a author writes a fictional story, a lot of times we have them writing through the lens of their own experiences. As you know, I'm a fellow author, and I've never been able to write fiction very well, and so it's just a cool thing to watch somebody who has actually navigated that and done an awesome job. So let me bring him on the screen now, and welcome Brad Schaeffer. Hey, man. Very cool. Awesome to have you. There you are in studio. We were just riffing before we got on the camera above your head there. Just tell us about that framed picture.
Oh, that behind me, that's a gift. That was really something that was handed down to me by my late father, who was a Marine in Korea. And that is the last speech, public speech of Douglas MacArthur before the that's at West Point in 1962. And it's called Duty, Honor, Country, and it's if anybody's looking for an absolutely beautiful speech, it is definitely worth looking up. And there's also audio of it on YouTube. And it really affected my father deeply. And so that's he's been gone for a long time, but I love to have that because I kind of feel like he's with me to have that behind me.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that, everybody. We'll put that in the show notes, just so, I want to get one of those for my office now. So I just want to read something here, Brad, and then we'll talk about it. You also have a website, which is on the stock ticker there. Everybody, Brad writes I think you call it a blog or a newsletter.
I write for different media outlets, yes.
Yeah.
I write one newsletter, I farm out my material to others. Although I do now have a Substack page that has some of my own stuff.
That's the one that I caught. So we'll talk more about that at the end as we wrap up and get everybody to know where to go and get that. And so we're going to go back to the beginning of life here, Brad, and just get into the story. We were just talking about something that happened when you were 5, so you can get into that. But this is what Brad wrote me. He said, Tom, basically my father struggled with drinking more of a social functioning alcoholic. Perhaps he just liked to tie one on, but I'm sure today he'd have been classified with bipolar disorder. He fought often, sometimes violently, with my older brothers, one of whom became a crack addict, though now he's a Christian minister and has been drug-free for years. But not until he went from being a top commodities trader in Singapore and Chicago to living in an unheated apartment with all his money gone in the dead of a Chicago winter. Goes on to talk about the next tragedy in his life, which is about his father. So I'm going to stop there. I mean, it's just a remarkable story. Take us back to, well, age 5. There was a moment.
Well, at age 5, actually, when I was born, I was diagnosed with what's called an atrial defect, which we would just commonly call hole in the heart. And so at age 5, I was actually admitted to Johns Hopkins Children's Hospital, and I was one of the first, to my knowledge, is 1972. I was one of the first recipients of open heart surgery. Um,
Wow. Wow.
and yeah, and it was I was very fortunate to have some of the best pediatric cardiologists around, including a doctor who just died recently. His name was Haller, Haller, and he was a wonderful man. I still have memories of him, even though that was 50 years ago, just about. Um, so yeah, I mean, so I've kind of started off my life not living a normal life. I mean, most kids don't go undergo major surgery at that age.
No
Um,
kidding.
and yeah, and in a way, it affected me because my father, who was a combat veteran Marine in Korea. Like I said, he was wounded in action. Actually, he got the Purple Heart.
Mm.
Chinese mortar round, almost blew his foot off.
No
And
way.
yeah, and he would always call the scar I had on my chest. He called it my badge of courage, which I always found
That
sweet.
is that is sweet. I'm going to stop there for a minute, everybody. Teaching moment. When fathers say things, sometimes they have memorable meanings that we relive. The scar, badge of courage. Can I ask you a question about the story of when the Chinese round thing? Did you learn about that first through him telling you the story?
Yeah, he actually was. He was one of those veterans who didn't mind opening up and talking about it. Like I know some don't want to talk about it,
Yeah.
but he was pretty open about it. And we actually still had the boot. I don't know if we do anymore. We still have his Boondocker boot where there's a mortar round. There's a hole in it from the shrapnel.
Wow.
Yeah,
That's
yeah,
That's amazing, Brad. We were just riffing back and forth here. I go on journey in my head. You told a story there. My father-in-law died many years ago. He was in Italy and a sheep herder, and eventually in through the war. And my wife showed me. My wife's Italian. When we had dinner in the early days, he brought his military Italian, whatever you call it, and there was a hole through it. And he told a story of, covering himself up with leaves to hide himself. The Germans walked right over him, and he took a bullet through there. I can't
yeah.
imagine the trauma that your dad had to live with that circumstance. But take us back in. Keep going.
Well, I think when you deal with that, it gives you a different perspective on the world. For some people, I think it makes, and some people can't seem to get past it. And I'm wondering, I've often wondered if my father was one of those. But so he was injured. He basically, the way he described it was mortar round. It was I guess one of these raids or whatever, and him and his platoon, and he was a second lieutenant, so he was a platoon commander, and rounds came in, and he was running through the snow because Korea was very cold, right? Next thing he knew it, he was tumbling end over end, and he got back up and he kept running, and he said he felt a sloshing in his boot as if he
Ooh.
stepped in water, and then when he got to the aid station, they to my surprise, they didn't cut his boot off. I guess they didn't have it. They just pulled it off,
Uh,
and so he poured out part of his
uh,
heel. They sewed it
you
back on. They sewed it back on. They sent him, and actually, I have a picture of him. He'd gotten the Purple Heart in the, I think it was a Swedish hospital ship. I'm not sure.
Wow. Well, let's first of all, thanks for sharing that. You tell a good story, man. My
But,
visualization is going crazy, but
yeah,
the sloshing, that one word, and we honor your father. I know he's not here, but what a hero that story is.
yeah.
So take us from there. So there's the part of the early part of your story of so your dad came back from war, and then you started experiencing some of his, I guess, some of the impacts of the war on his himself and interactions with the family. Talk about that.
Well, I think he came back, and I was young. I was very young. I mean, I was 16 when he passed away. So
Yeah.
my older siblings, I'm the youngest of five. My older siblings can probably even fill those gaps in better than I can.
Yeah.
But he definitely had, he definitely was somebody with some sort of form of mental illness. He could be very kind and very sweet, or he could be very vicious.
Yeah.
Not so much physical, but just he had a very wicked temper, but he also had a great laugh. He was a very, I mean, I guess bipolar is probably the best way to describe it. And when he was at his best, he was a wonderful man. And when he was at his worst, you didn't want to be anywhere around him.
Yeah.
And I don't know. I would assume the war had a lot to do with that. The fact that he talked about it a lot after he had a couple drinks, and usually after he had a couple drinks, he would talk about it. But he also grew up in that Mad Men era where men drank all the time. He didn't smoke, but
Yeah.
they had the Canadian club lunches and
Yeah.
everything like that. So it was a little bit different time, but he definitely would open up a little bit. And I think he noticed as I got older, I was already interested in writing, and I think he could tell that I was someone he could tell a story to. And especially when it was me and him and my mother left, when everybody else moved on and graduated,
Yeah.
and so he would just tell me some very interesting stories about the time, stuff that, like one of them was he said that as they're getting ready on the landing ship or whatever it was that they knew like one guy was they all the Marines in the platoon could figure they all like knew the one guy who was going to get it,
Yeah.
the guy who was, and they would keep pointing at him saying, "You're going to get it." And the guy would say, "I'm not going to get it." And they're like, I mean, but the way he described it was so matter of fact, But he was a man of deep faith, and the reason was he had a sensation that he was going to get wounded in action. Like he didn't think he was going to get out of Korea without something happening to him.
Yeah.
So he was a very devout Catholic, and he prayed to the Blessed Mother. He said, "If I get wounded or when I get wounded, just please make it as far away from the head as possible." And he got
Wow.
wounded in the heel.
Well, amen to that.
That's whatever you want to call it, but that solidified it for him. So he was a devout man too. He was a very complicated character.
Yeah.
In the
Well,
worst of ways. And
yeah.
honestly, I think that's why he identified with MacArthur behind me, because same thing. If you want something to like somebody, there's plenty of material there. If you want something to dislike somebody, there's plenty of material there too. And I think a lot of people in the audience who are dealing with PTSD and dealing with bipolar people can identify with that.
Yeah, it's first of all, we honor your dad. We love your story so far, and he was a hero. And I always like to say that the children sometimes are the unsung heroes in a family where there's that dynamic with a parent. You know a little bit about my own story, so today's to shine the spotlight on you. But PTSD is an interesting thing. Just tell you a quick story that came to mind. And by the way, I'm a baptized Catholic when I was a kid, and I kind of denied my faith though, Brad, because what was going on in my home. But I really, when I had my recent brain injury, I fell, and I probably wouldn't have been here if I fell an inch a different way in a bathtub. Yeah, I have impaired vision. My eyes don't move from side to side still, and just still recovering. But I went from being a C-level executive to a night stalker in Costco for 2 years, and then a table waiter. And I found myself doing the sign of the cross. I had my wife buy me a cross, and I really refound my faith just over a few years ago when I couldn't see the future and I had nothing left. And all those war movies, one of my favorite, Saving Private Ryan, was Spielberg created such an amazing, I think it was Spielberg, yeah. And you see the soldiers running on the beach, and they're all doing the sign of cross too. I think it really is something that gets you through it. PTSD, I was in a conference once, and there was a guy teaching us, a young guy, Canadian, and I think he was one of those that jumped out of a plane in the middle of the dark. They dropped you into a war zone. He was a sniper. And the Canadian Forces, my dad was a military commanding officer in the British Army before we came here. My dad was born in Fiji, and then here Canadian Forces. So I was raised an Army brat, a lot of respect for the service. Well, anyway, this guy was teaching us, and he was in one of the parts of our forces that get sent over all around the world. And he was teaching at the front of the room, and he kept doing this. And all of a sudden he stopped and he said, "Hey, I just want to tell you guys that that's PTSD." And even today, you can't sit with him and have a dinner or anything without him doing that. And so I started studying brain science, Brad, probably about 4 or 5 years ago because of the therapy I had to go through to reteach my brain, and started realizing that there's parts of the brain that PTSD is, trauma is unresolved from the past. If it elevates to a level where there's guilt, shame, or you feel like you're still in that moment, it's you've got to get psychiatric or some type of help. You just can't get through it.
Yeah,
So,
and in the 1980s and 70s, it wasn't discussed as much as it is now.
for sure.
He was sort of a victim of the times too, because I mean they called it battle fatigue back then.
Yeah.
Shell shock, something like that. And like I know with him, as a little boy, I used to play a game where I would try and, when he was asleep, I'd try and see how far into the bedroom I could get before he'd jump awake. Because he'd become so attuned to, like because
Yeah.
you know, the Marines, they sleep one guy on, you know, like everybody in Baltimore, and you know, and they worry about raids, right? So he becomes so attuned to the slightest noise that would wake him up,
Yeah.
and 30 years later, 25 years later, he still had that. Like he was
Crazy, man. You're a bad boy. That's too funny.
so funny. I didn't realize I probably was messing with him. Yeah, I didn't. I just thought it was a
Here's
fun. Yeah.
Yeah, we'll get into the next part of the story, which I want to focus on, and then we'll move further into what you're doing with this. But this is a serious topic for me because when I did fall, I fell backwards in a bathtub. I was doing a ride for cancer a couple of days on my bike, and the first night I had a shower, fell backwards, cracked a hole in the tub. But the thing is that I couldn't walk downstairs afterwards for almost a year with the fear of falling. Because what they taught me in the brain clinic was my brain, there's a part of it that was putting me back in that moment as if I was falling. So, you know, picture walking down even 5 stairs. I had to hold railings and I was a basket case. And that's classic, what PTSD did. And through neuroplasticity and things, I fixed it. But it's a tough thing. You lost your dad. I'm sorry about that. It was a part of the story where my heart grew because he took his life by suicide. Tell us a bit about that.
Well, I mean, he had been having more and more issues, more and more mental issues, and the ironic thing with his story is that he had actually just gotten a promotion of all things, but it required him to move to Florida, required him to do all these different things, and I think just all the changes in his life, I just between that and between unresolved issues, whatever, I just think something in him snapped a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
And so he took his own life 2 days after my 16th birthday. And I was away, fortunately, at the time. I called in to see how everybody was doing, and people told me what had happened, so it had just happened. And that was sort of the before and after of my life, you know. And the strange thing is, and this is to anybody out there who might be dealing with this or whatever, my mother always said, you know, I didn't think he talked about it, but you don't really think the person's going to do it. When somebody starts talking about it, take them seriously, you know. And it's a shame now because I think with the proper medications today, and, you know, like he didn't want to go into therapy or anything like that because he was afraid that it would get back to the company, and back then they think he was a loon, you know. I mean, they just weren't as understanding. Remember, this was only 10 years after Vietnam was over, you know.
Yeah.
Korea was only 25 years in the rearview, or 30 years in the rearview mirror. It was interesting that it was 30 years almost to the day of the end of the war that he did it. So I don't know if there was anything conscious about it. There was no note or anything like that. He just did it.
Yeah.
You know, it was it's hard, but you know, you have no choice but to move forward.
Yeah. Brad, thank you. I know that every time you have to tell that story, it's painful because, as we just talked about, the brain doesn't have a time clock. And so those things continue. I know one thing, man, that's why I love you and your story, is that every day that plays in our unconscious minds, we put on the front, but we have to work really hard at that. I've had many people on my show because I'm an advocate for mental health, particularly the stigma. And if you look at my story, I navigated through a career as an executive, which keeping the wolves in my head silent. And it was all rooted in the childhood experiences with my dad being a chronic drunk and a violent guy. I learned a lot about suicide, and it's interesting because suicidal ideation, they say that if somebody's even talking or showing signs or making statements of despair, like, you know, I can't get out of this feeling, you have to pay attention. When I first got concussed, I slipped into deep depression in 3 months and had my first suicidal thoughts, and it scared the hell out of me. And I learned in therapy, Brad, that suicidal thoughts are not just about yourself, but you can have thoughts of harming others. And I actually visualized my second bout of it was seeing my daughter, who's 24, who's across the country in university, hanging by a thread, a rope in her dorm room. And that's when I knew something was wrong, and I was fighting going to get help because I didn't want to take medication. I didn't want people to think all this. But everybody, let's honor Brad in the story. Like, if Brad is absolutely right, if you are or somebody around you, you know, there's people out there that will help. Absolutely. So thanks for sharing that with us. So let's go further in the story. I mean, now, and so there you are, and there must have been some feelings or anger or guilt, shame, whatever you experienced through that with his dad, but you channeled that somehow into writing. Tell us about that.
Yeah, no, very angry at first. I mean, the way the sanguinity, I guess if you want to use that word, that I speak about it now, came about from years of processing. I never went through really this therapy or anything like that, but I was always writing, and so like this book that I finished was really had started off in completely different iterations. It was really just me writing feelings down
Yeah.
and whatnot. And I find that very helpful. I mean, that's why I know people like to keep journals
Yeah.
and things like that. And it's a very helpful way to get through something. Plus, I was very fortunate. I had 3 older brothers and an older sister who were very supportive.
Yeah, you had a good nucleus. Can you hold up the book there, Brad, and just tell us speak out the title out loud for us?
Sure. The book's called The Extraordinary, and I love I'm very happy with the cover. The people at Post Hill did a great job with that. So,
Yeah, and congratulations! It's a #1 bestseller.
well, not yet. The
in a,
autism
in the autism. We're going to get a little bit of fireworks there for you.
and also I think childhood development and
We're just having a little fun here in the studio.
Yeah.
Well done. So everybody, I'm just going to call to action here because this will be out there broadly. An author's work gets known if we get their book, but don't just get his book. Get it, write a review, post it on Amazon.com or on Goodreads.com. I'm making a public commitment to post a review for you, Brad, and that'll help you work get known broader. So tell us about the book. What's it about?
Well, the book is about it's really tackles 2 subjects at once. It's written through the first person narrative of a boy who's 14 years old named Wes, who is autistic. And he is very he doesn't speak much. So all of his thoughts, all of his feelings are kind of poured out on the pages.
Yeah.
He's describing so he's been almost like a voyeur watching his family, and and what's interesting about the family is none of them seem to understand him except for his father, who is a Marine. I mean, like you said, art often imitates life.
Yeah.
And the Marine and the father, who's the toughest person in the family, but seems to see something in the son that the others just don't, or don't want to, or what have you. But then Wes's world gets turned upside down because the father gets pulled away for a tour of duty. And then when he comes back prematurely, which Wes also notices, because Wes is very attuned with calendar, as often people, that's one of his things, one of his little obsessions, and the father comes back and he's lost his legs in a terrorist attack. And so then the father starts dealing with PTSD. And so Wes is kind of watching this through the eyes of somebody trying to process it through his world. So really, it's a book about autism. It's a book about PTSD. In this particular case, the worlds meet. He's got an older brother who is trying to deal with it. He's got older sister more. They are not based on anybody that I know. These are from my head. So in case my family's out there, no, you're not. Don't worry. And the older sister is kind of checked out, and she's moved to New York, and she's just doing a thing. And the mother is still grieving the loss of a baby from SIDS, and so it actually sounds more depressing than it is. It's just it's kind of like ordinary people, in that genre.
Yeah.
And basically what it is, it's a book about acceptance. It's a book about overcoming tragedy, and in the end, I mean, one of the reviewers I just read today actually, who has a child on the spectrum, said that she loved the ending, and that was the idea. She said it has a beautiful ending, and I like to give people hope, and I think that's the way I view life. I mean, everybody has hard times. It's how you get through them. You're not gonna be able to avoid them. I mean, I guess if you never leave the house, you avoid something. But like you said, then you slip and you hit your head in the bathtub. I mean.
Yeah. Don't take life. Yeah, I mean, you're listening to Brad here, but you don't take life for granted because you never know what tomorrow brings. I just want to put it up on the screen here. It's going to block us a bit. Oh, it fits perfectly. There's the cover of the book. Beautiful cover, everyone. And I was telling Brad before we got on live here in the green room about a lady who is in a group I'm in, and her son has autism, and she just can't find any solace. So we've been telling her a mental health strategy and I think this applies to you, is they call it a happy distraction. Go do something, paint, write, sing. And so we were telling her, and she said, well, give me an idea. Give me an idea. So I want to tell you, man, this is like first time live we're putting this out there. We're going to take Brad's book and we're going to give it to her as a strategy. Here, read this book and go out and just start journaling and writing. And I think it's going to change her life. I want to read something here again off of the letter that Brad sent. He said, the most relevant and the best way I learned to cope was through writing. And this book, original draft, began as a freshman in college before undergoing many iterations. It's my working it out, so to speak. I love this. Don Henley said, Eagles, everyone. The creative impulse comes from the dark side of the personality, and I was able to transform my negative anger into a positive, a best-selling novel. You're amazing, man. Absolutely phenomenal. And this is the part of Teaching Moment, everybody. Come back, bookmark this, watch it again and again and again. This is where you find hope, where you do what Brad said and get out of your chair and do something with your pain, your struggle. So, Brad, when you're writing fictional novels, just give us a couple quick lessons without too much spoiler on the book. So some of the thoughts, when I wrote my book, I did it as a fable and a hybrid of facts. You've got, just to quote, not about your family, but where do the thoughts come from? I mean, man, I can never write that kind of work, but how do you do that?
Well, I mean, obviously the PTSD side of it comes a lot.
You had experience, yeah.
Yeah, and I guess in that respect, I kind of channel the way I was through the older brother. So I guess the closest to a real life character in the book would be the older brother, who kind of is the way I was in high school.
I see.
I had 2 years in high school after this.
Yeah.
And also, what I failed to mention before is that my mother was extremely strong. My mother, and she actually, just to go on a side note for a second, just to so here's my mother, right? She would have been, I want to say like 50, basically my age. I think like 53 years old. She's getting ready to have this beautiful life in Florida. Her father got a big promotion. He worked actually for a large Canadian company. And, and then next thing she knows the man's gone. He takes his own life. Insurance doesn't pay out because it's suicide, right? And suddenly, and her, other than me, and she's got a 16-year-old boy still in the house. I mean, her life has been completely turned upside down. If anybody could feel sorry for herself, it was her. And what she did was she committed to raising me for the next 2 years. She gave me just the right balance of freedom with discipline, And then later on, my family is originally from Maryland. I grew up in Illinois because my father was when I was 5. She took her life. She moved back to Baltimore where she grew up, but she was in Annapolis. She met a man she knew. She built a whole new life for herself. And she had 35 wonderful years afterwards. And, and she was very happy. She just passed away last year at the age of almost 91.
Wow.
Life throughout, she was a contract bridge player till the day she died. So she never had any episodes with Alzheimer's or anything. So she was kind of an inspiration too in my life because and for my whole family.
Yeah.
When she passed away, my oldest brother, who gave the eulogy, channeled Shakespeare, and he said, we won't see her like again.
Yeah.
And,
I love it.
If anybody is a good role model, it was her as well. It's my mother Marge. And
I want to jump in there for a minute and just honor her for she's another unsung hero. I mean, talk about Purple Hearts here. That there's for every one of her, as you probably know, Brad, there's millions of single moms who just can't make things work. What's remarkable to me is there's something, and I know you don't have an ego. You've got a lot of authenticity. When I asked you the question about where the thoughts in the book come from, you nailed it, because that's classic hero's journey. If you didn't, I was going to call BS on you. But absolutely, everybody, what Brad did is he channeled his energy, but his anger into writing. And some of those threads of thoughts came from how he was feeling. And if there's anything you can do for mental health is you want to channel your energy and talk about it or write about it. Going back to your mom, she is a heroic person, and there's something about you. There's this positivity, even in just your aura. You've probably been told this, but you have this almost constant happiness about you, despite, like, when I read your bio and then I said, what's missing here? I look at your picture and I was like, I think you're absolutely right. Mothers who can give their sons the gift of resilience. What you observed she did, and I'll finish with this. When I did some of my own therapy, they said that even if you, it's called maltreatment. So I grew up in a home where there was maltreatment towards me personally, violence, physical and mental. But they said that what happens is up to age 20, parts of your brain don't develop like normal children. So you would be put in this category. There's parts of your brain, the way it thinks, handles stress and emotions, that develops a bit differently. But if you have another figure in your life, an influencer, a parent, an external, that is there to balance the thoughts that you get, you can actually make that work, and you can actually develop healthy. I didn't have that, but that's why you got to love your mom forever. You do, I know, and that's a gift. So everybody, if you know somebody who's in a difficult situation, step in, be their mentor, be their friend. What an amazing woman she was. What was her name? First name?
Margaret, or Marge. We all called her Marge. So.
Yeah, wonderful.
Fantastic mother.
Yeah.
I'm very fortunate to have had a very strong mother, and so a lot of it has to do with support networks, like you were talking about.
Yeah.
Reach out to people if you see somebody struggling, and they don't have somebody, be that person in their life.
Yeah.
I mean, just the ability to open up and to just unload, it's an amazing therapy. And
Yeah.
That's why there are such things as therapists. But if it's somebody that you know and you care about and who's watched you your whole life, that definitely, that adds a sense of authenticity to the counseling as well.
That's pretty cool. There's a Stanford brain scientist, Andrew Huberman. I don't know if you've heard of him, but he's got a podcast, and my wife and I listened to it. I learned a lot from it, but he just did a couple episodes on how the brain goes through grief and also trauma. I might send you a link to it, but I think you're gonna find it very enlightening. Let's just talk about one more thing. First of all, you are a commodities trader, or you do some funky things?
Yeah, it's actually that's actually my day job.
Okay. I mean, we could spend a whole episode, dude, talking about that, because holy crap,
Yeah,
the world.
I actually wrote a whole book on that because I grew up. I went to University of Illinois, and when I came out, my brother, one of my older brothers, was a trader on the Chicago Mercantile Exchange, and so I did artwork at a ad agency for like 6 months. So
Yeah.
in downtown Chicago, and it was neat. But they say about what they say about advertising, it's a great job if your parents can afford to send you. So, it was long hours. It was fun. I was drawing pictures, which I like to do. But my brother basically said, "Why don't you see where I work?" And I went into the trading floor of the Chicago Mercantile. If anybody's seen Ferris Bueller's Day Off, the pit that they're looking at, that's the Eurodollar futures pit. That's
Yep.
where I was.
Cool.
And, so I did that for years. I went to New York. I ended up in New York. That's how I ended up out here in New Jersey. I went to New York for the oil trading market, and then I became an energy broker. And I've been trading energy and everything, other commodities for really off and on for 30 years. So that's what I do to actually make a living.
What's the title of that book you wrote, by the way? We'll put it in the show.
It hasn't come out yet. I love the title. Petromaniacs as well.
When does that come up, Brett?
You know what? I got to find somebody to publish it first.
Okay.
Right now it's a stack of papers in my drawer.
Okay.
But,
Well,
the good thing is that the trading, well, they're good, but from a storage standpoint, the trading pits are now gone, right?
Yeah.
They're superseded by electronic trading. So now I have an ending to it. So it's kind of like my Liar's Poker version of what I saw on the trading floor. And you want to see some interesting characters, just go down into a commodities trading floor for a while and see what happens. You will meet.
Oh my gosh.
You don't need fiction.
Yeah. Somebody has to write a book on the language off the trading floor, the way the little pieces of paper and all the things they say. Somehow it just translates.
I have all that in there. I explain, how to talk to people, too.
Really?
Yeah. So you have all these languages. It's nice to do all that. People think it's people looking on the outside in think it's crazy, and but it's actually it was actually a very high functioning, well functioning system. It's kind of like if you don't know anything about beehives, it's chaotic to you, but somebody who understands bees can actually tell you exactly what's going on. So that was a very interesting place to work, and I think that also sparked my interest in characters. Different people. Like I stood next to one guy to my left, and the Eurodollar options pit was was a Harvard law graduate.
Yeah.
And the guy to my right was a high school dropout tennis pro. And they were both, and the guy to my right looked like Stephen Stills, and the guy to my left looked like somebody right out of, right out of Wall Street. And yet they both, they both were they both were traders. What I loved about it was that nobody cared what your degree was. Nobody cared about anything. All they cared about is if you made money. And it was the great equalizer. There were people who had resumes as long as their arms who just didn't make it.
Yeah.
There were other people. One of the best traders in history was a guy who was a meat packer before he went to the bond pit in Chicago.
Yeah. Well, Hollywood loves Wall Street. I mean, there's so many great movies and so many good actors. What's his name there? All right. That movie.
Matthew McConaughey. Yeah.
Yeah, that was hilarious. And then there's the other fella. The name escapes me. Who did the Titanic role? Yeah. I one of my favorite movies. I hate to say it because it's probably one about greed. Is Wall Street with I think I actually bought it and I binge watched it and I think the first third of my career, going back 30 years, was banking and in insurance. And I just went a couple threads because we're storytelling. And every time you say something, everybody, this is the nature of the show, by the way. When you think you don't have something in common with Brad, every time Brad tells a story, that's why I want stories, we connect to a thread. So Baltimore, Maryland was where I saw my first Baltimore Orioles game. I was my board of directors, because I ran a company that was Canadian, part of an American insurance group, Aegon. I used to go to board meetings, and the first time there, they said, let's take a walk down to your stadium. And man, Canada has great stadiums, but we're a tenth of your population. But that is like just yesterday. I can visualize it when you said that. And I've been to Chicago once, but I'd love to go back there. Great things. When you talk about the floor, I asked you offline if you knew a gentleman, and I won't mention his name, but he was the other. You are now the second person in my life that's told this story, so I'm honored about the floor and your experience. He actually they filmed that movie Trading Places, and they filmed the floor, and he told me that they actually asked him to teach the actors how you behave on the floor, and he was actually in the movie. And so every time I watch it, I squint and I'm trying to find him. I can't find him on the floor, so now I'm going to go back and watch the movie you just told us about. But
you won't find me in that.
No.
That futures pit, I was in the little options.
Okay.
I can tell you all those guys are.
Yeah.
But, I think I want to say the Trading Places floor was the gold pit on the.
Yeah.
Because the concentrated orange juice didn't actually have a pit.
Okay.
That's actually one of all time, though.
Yeah.
Trading Places is to commodities traders what like Caddyshack is to golfers, or like This Is Spinal Tap is to rock musicians. So
Yeah.
like on the floor when. If the market would start to rally, people would scream, "The Dukes are buying."
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, everybody had their own little technique. My brother, who was the trader, was one of the funniest guys I ever met. So
really,
he would be one of the guys screaming. He would make a shout out to like. To It's a Wonderful Life, and he'd go in his Jimmy Stewart voice, he'd go, "Don't just eat Potter's not selling, Potter's buying." The guys all over the place. You'd see guys getting a fight every now and then. Fall down in the pit. You gotta try and crawl yourself back up from among the detritus of all the gum. It was a wild place to work. Really
I bet.
The reason I stopped there is because it was starting to affect my hearing, because it's basically people screaming as loud as they can. Because you're jammed up.
Yeah.
And you're trying to do.
No kidding.
Yeah.
That's
the characters were just great. They were just some.
Yeah. Oh, Eddie Murphy. The guy's just nuts.
I love that movie. Yeah.
By the way, Netflix, not a commercial for it, but there's a new one out with Eddie and Robert De Niro. It's 2022. If you look at your Netflix, it's rated #1 on the list of 10 now. We watched it last night, and it's just imagine De Niro and Murphy today, right? It's just a classic. That also could be a whole nother show about the impact of working in that type of career, right? The impact on mental health and stress, because those guys, they have a lifespan, but it's like almost like the brain. I learned this. The brain creates dopamine in anticipation of reward. A lot of people think dopamine hits are when you get something. It's like if you go buy that, you have 6 months. You bought the new Ferrari and it's being shipped from Italy. You're excited, and then you get it and you drive, and a week later it's like, where's that feeling? And they say that commodity traders or traders, a lot of them experience that, right? It's that dopamine constant, but it has other sides of it. I read your notes about your brother and his experience too, right?
Yeah, he's a really good man.
He's a pastor?
What's that?
Is he a pastor now, or I think?
Yeah, he's a pastor at Living Truth Ministries out in Iowa. And
nice.
His path was a classic, flying too close to the sun path.
Yeah.
He'll be the first one to tell you about it. So I'm not, saying anything that
yeah.
won't know. And in fact, I think his stories was very inspiring. And he just became he got caught up in that whole lifestyle, that whole, the seedy underside to the lifestyle, which was drugs. I mean, The Wolf of Wall Street lampoons it, but the Wolf of Wall Street wasn't that far off the truth. From
really?
The way these people lived, yeah. And if you have a propensity for addiction, like some people, they have 2 speeds, which is park and 90 miles an hour, right?
Yeah.
And if I guess I never did, or whatever. I always maybe tempered it, or maybe I had outlets like writing already, or music. But so he became too caught up in it, and by the time it was, then it eventually caught him.
Yeah.
And he had to, and they say about character, you can tell a lot about somebody. Either take away everything they have or give them more than they need, right? When everything was taken away from him, he reached deep down in himself. He admitted he had a problem. He checked himself into rehab. There was no intervention, nothing like that. And he basically reevaluated his life. And like you were talking about, he rediscovered his faith. And his faith just took him over, and it's protected him. And he's a lot better for it. There were some guys on the trading floor who were born again Christians, and they would take their money and they wouldn't spend it on drugs. They'd spend it on setting up missions across the.
That's cool.
Yeah, one of them was a former fraternity brother of mine, actually.
That's amazing.
Not everybody was in that lifestyle.
Yeah.
His brother got caught up in it, but then he turned it around, and he's actually he's the reason I'm here, quite frankly. So I'm very grateful to him. Well,
I am glad that part of the story came out. And first of all, again, we honor you for your integrity, but also for the the courage. I mean, let's face it, a lot of guys are taught growing up, you don't show vulnerability, you don't talk about things like that. I have to say that there's one book, and I'm being open about my own faith here. I told you that I denied my faith, Brad, because of what was going on when I was younger. But when I grew up, there was nothing in my home from any. I had 3. Younger brother, older brother. My younger brother has Tourette syndrome. It's a pretty awful thing that we think was triggered by what was going on in the home. My parents divorced, so I was homeless at age 12, and my dad was destroyed the family. But when he died 3 years ago, but when I reconnected with him a few months before, and my book, by the way, the first chapter is called The Boy. I didn't put him in a good light, and when I reconnected with him, I think God just said, Tom, you need to go and meet with him. And he said, son, I love you. He said, I'm sorry what I did to you. He said, I love your book. And everything fell off my shoulders, this weight, because it was forgiveness. But the book that got me to that coffee, because I was restrained from him, was the Bible. And when I was younger, honestly, Brad, I did a Tony Robbins program 20 years ago where they had you map out your values, your current values. The word love, gratitude, none of that was on my list. I didn't even know what love looked like. So when I started reading the Bible, I realized that the Bible is just a series of 60 books of, Jesus' life. It's basically it taught me how to show love, how to be kind, how to forgive, how to navigate life. And I wish I had it a long time ago, but today I live through that. It teaches me, I pray, I say I'm a sinner, I ask for forgiveness every morning. And I look to bring people like you on my show because I think that we came together for the same reasons. I want to honor your brother for that because, what's his name?
Todd.
Hey Todd, you're welcome to come on my show, man, anytime. You gotta get your brother to connect you. But here's the thing, Todd, that is a blessing. There's a word idolatry, which I know you know, and they say that if you have material things like children houses and money and wealth, and then there's the family, all those things will crumble. The one relationship that'll never crumble is the one with Christ. And because he loves me and he's always there for me. I can't see right. I can't see my future sometimes. I sometimes in my darkest moments just sit and talk to him. And I know that he loves me. And even though I couldn't find that in my life, Brad and Todd, I now know that it's okay. And so thank you, Todd, for what you're doing with your faith in your community, because, dude, that's pretty awesome. So, all right, and getting all choked up here. I'm going to get back on track here with you, Brad.
He's also the funniest guy I ever met, by the way. So he's got a great sense of humor.
Well, there you go, and we have that down on tape. So you gotta connect us. Last thing before we wrap up is I want you to just put the book back up again and full screen it there. Awesome, the extraordinary Brad Schaeffer, and just tell us now, Brad. One last thing. If when you're done with this world, with all the work that you've done in the book and all, what do you hope the world to look like when you're done with your mission?
Oh gosh.
I know, putting you on the spot.
I want the world to look like?
Yeah. I mean, you got your book and you're teaching through it. There's threads in it. You're teaching, whatever it is you're doing today.
Well, I would like it to be filled with people who don't hold grudges, if that makes any sense.
Yeah.
I mean, one of my favorite expressions is yesterday's history, tomorrow's a mystery, and I just feel like there's so much, and I think you really see it in social media a lot.
Yeah.
And I'm guilty of it too. I'm not gonna, I'm not throwing stones here. And my house is made of glass, just like anybody else's. We're human beings. We're sick.
Yes.
But I do think there's a lot, like you were talking about with your dad, and in a way, I kind of had that same conversation with my dad just through the book.
Yeah.
Right? As it, and it's you can't hold a grudge. You can't stay angry at people, and forgiveness is such a powerful emotion, and it's such a powerful. It is, I think, the best thing you can do, because people become a prisoner of their own grudges more than anything else. I mean, I've had people do me wrong in the past, and I've done people wrong in the past. And I'm very, very sorry for what I've done to people, and but I'm also forgiving what people do to me.
Yeah.
It's just the way to live. You can't. You're on this earth for a very short time. I think people don't realize. And I think one of the reasons I love history so much is it reminds me of how short life really is.
Yeah.
And you just have this little tiny blip, which can make a difference. And if you can leave, you're not gonna be able to change the world.
Yeah.
Very few people can do that. And certainly not for the better. People have changed it for the worse. Obviously, we've seen that. But
Yeah.
But if you can change your little part of it, and if you can, tell if people can learn from your example, and hopefully if people are watching this and they say, wow, okay, this guy had it kind of tough when he grew up, but he seems all right, you can do it, And my final bit of advice to anybody dealing with hard times is keep a sense of humor. I mean, really, listen to the Comedy Channel.
Yeah.
Turn off the news. Put on like a Norm Macdonald thing or something. Just keep a sense of humor and laugh. Laughter is what got my family through a lot of it too.
Yeah.
And and just I know it sounds almost superficial, but don't underestimate the power of laughter. It is they say laughter is the best medicine. I mean, that's not a cliche. That is a statement of fact. At least certainly in my life. So I highly recommend that.
Yeah, well, amen to that. And so everybody, come back to this teaching moments from Brad Schaeffer here. Don't hold grudges, and laugh more. By the way, Brad, I honor that because, dude, you have to send you some stuff, but scientifically and in mental health, they teach you the value of laughter and humor, because it creates you can't have a negative, positive thought at the same time. If you're laughing, that puts you out in a better space. And there's also chemicals the brain releases. I have a friend who lost the use of his right arm in a stroke, and through creativity and humor, he's now a stand-up comedian. He actually got the whole use of his right side of his body back just from that, and it's a scientific fact. So awesome advice for us here. By the way, when you look at your background, you got writing, you've got some of the things you've done. I think you play guitar and you do some stuff with that, and I think that's a big reason why you're where you are. I want to close by honoring you with a couple things. We do this on all the shows, so I'm going to full screen me here for a sec. So we're going to lose Brad for a minute. There we go. So Brad, you see in the background there that the image on the TV screen? All right. When I created the show, I wanted to create an award. So you're going to get an award. You're going to be inducted into the Quiet Warrior Tribe. These are what we call challenge coins. And given your dad was a military man, I'm going to give you two. And I'd like you to have that. Now, these were created in World War II, and soldiers would carry them in their pockets and commit to each other. So if you didn't have yours, you might buy drinks or whatever. You'd have some fun. They're now used around the world for community, Brad. So Alcoholics Anonymous has theirs, first responders. And the front of the coin is they're hand-painted, crafted, minted in the U.S. The front of the coin is the show image, but the back is the fully illustrated version of the hero's journey narrative, which is what this is all about. It's like what Brad did in taking the story of his father's death and weaving it into something of courage to come back as a shaman or guide with some wisdom and helping people. So welcome to the Quiet Warrior Tribe.
I'm honored. I appreciate that.
You're welcome. We'll be sending it out to you.
Thank you.
You're absolutely welcome. So we're connected for life, and all there's probably about 230 of us now around the world. We're in 17 countries, and it's hard to get these. And so you made the cut for the show, and I'm really proud of that. And then finally, 4 words. I write these down as the guest is speaking. These are leadership words to recognize Brad. Number 1 is hope. Number 2 is curiosity. He's got this a childlike curiosity of, and I think that's one of the reasons why you are as strong as you are, wisdom. And certainly the difference between wisdom and knowledge is time. And dude, you're 54, but you've had a lot of wisdom. And then the last one, I put enthusiasm, because there's this enthusiastic part of you, which I just want to be around you. And I know people who watch this, read your books, will pick that up. So I'll give you the last word, Brad, to tell people where to get the book or anything else.
Sure. Yeah, you can get my book on Amazon. Just The Extraordinary, Brad Schaeffer, or you can go on the Simon & Schuster site and they have it. And hopefully, if you buy it and you read it, first of all, I want to thank everybody who's already read it. I really appreciate that, and hopefully, it will help you see the world through the eyes of others, and you realize that if you're having issues, you're not alone. There's a lot of us out there, and just hang in there. I mean, life is worth living.
Love it. BradSchaefferAuthor.com, which it's on the screen there, everyone. It'll be in the show notes. Please go there and also sign up for his newsletter. He's got a page there that pops up. I just read the recent article. Really good stuff. And so thank you, Brad.
Thank you, Tom.
And just stand by, Brad. So everybody, find that true passion, find that true purpose like you see Brad's done here, and live the life that you deserve and desire. Okay, stand by, Brad.